of you like to wait? Yeah, I'm a pretty impatient guy. I hate waiting. I do. I tell my wife and kids all the time that I don't like surprises, but I can't wait for my birthday. I'll be 40 years old this year, and I've told Kelly I don't want anything. I don't want anything big, but I really do. And I don't like waiting. I don't like going to the Secretary of State when I have to renew my driver's license and go up there and, you got to take the little piece of paper that has the number on it, and then you have to go and you have to sit down if there's a seat. So I've started going early before the office even opens up, and I get there at the door, and wouldn't you know it, there's always like 10 or 12 people outside the door, and what do I have to do? Wait even longer. But waiting, it's not just constraint or just to waiting at the Secretary of State's office. We have other waiting places, don't we? Waiting places in life. Like waiting for a phone call from the doctor after a diagnosis has been given. That is an excruciatingly painful time of waiting. The doctor says it might be cancer. But we're going to have some tests 9 weeks from now. That's not an uncommon experience. That's a hard, soul-crushing 9 weeks. That's a deep waiting place. Or how about those waiting places in life, like when I really hurt Mark, and I'm trying really hard to reconcile that broken relationship. And I've extended that hand and that phone call and that contact, but I have to wait to find out if he'll extend it back. And if there's any way to reconcile. Anybody here been in that waiting space, waiting for a reconciled relationship? There's lots of waiting places in life. Waiting for the phone call, waiting for the family member, the friend to arrive, waiting at the rotten Secretary of State's office, waiting for great days of celebration, whatever it may be, there are waiting places in life. And in those times of waiting, we can go through a lot of things. We definitely can go through turmoil and frustration. Many of us in those waiting places, in those waiting spaces, we experience fear and anxiety. Many of us in those waiting spaces in life can fall into utter despair and lose that hope that we had so early on. Waiting spaces aren't always fun places to be in. Seldom are in my own experience. As kids, I don't think any of us like to wait, do we? You tell my kids, okay, well, we're going to go here. Can we go? Well, we got to wait for a few minutes. 30 seconds goes by. We ready yet? We hate waiting in life. What we find in both of our scriptures this morning are waiting spaces. We find Jeremiah, whom we believe wrote the book of Lamentations, this long prayer. Lamentations is a time when Israel has been taken off into exile. They've been removed from their own homeland, and they are now refugees there in Babylon. It begins with, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept as we remembered our home. How long, O Lord, are you going to be angry with us? How long is this going to last? How long are we going to be weeping? How long do we have to wait? And Jeremiah gets to a point where he's fed up. I've had enough of this. I don't think I can go any further, O God. And then at the point of his breaking, the verse right before what Kelly so beautifully read this morning says this: "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. That the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases," and so on, as we heard this morning. "This I call to mind, and therefore I have hope." He had to remind himself of what God's very character and nature is. He had to remind himself that even though he knows he's experienced this hardship and an entire people have experienced this separation from their homeland, from all they knew that was familiar with them, to them. Even though, however, I call this to mind, and I have hope that this is who you are, God, because you have shown it through the generations. This is who you are, Lord, because you have delivered your people time and time and time again, and I will hope. However, I will hope. In our New Testament lesson this morning, we hear about this man named Jairus. He has a 12-year-old daughter, the same age as my daughter who played flute this morning. We hope in our children, don't we? We place our life in them in some way. And as we watch them grow up, our hopes and our dreams are solidly rested in them. And an illness and a hardship comes, and those hopes are so easily dashed or set aside while fear creeps in. Imagine Jairus. His 12-year-old daughter is ill to the point of death. And he has no idea what to do, but he hears Jesus is coming. And he runs to this Jesus who's walking through town, and he meets him, falls down to his knees, and he says, Lord, I know that you have the power. I know that in you rests the power to heal, to make whole, to restore. I see in you the presence of God on the face of this earth, and I know you can do it. You just have to lay your hand on her and she'll be made well. And Jesus says, let's go. And then we are all, as we're hearing this story, put into a waiting place as we hear about this woman who for 12 years has been hemorrhaging. She's been going through what my mother used to tell me when I was a child were female issues. For 12 years straight. And she has spent everything she had on doctors and healers to no avail. And time after time again, she's been thrown back into this time of waiting and of hoping and of wondering if she will ever be made whole, ever be healed, ever be restored. Because in Jesus' day, when a woman was going through her cycle, she was ritually impure. Couldn't have contact with the rest of the world until afterward. But for 12 years she's experienced this. Complete and utter isolation from the world. An isolation that I'm certain has led to a deep despair. But she hears Jesus is coming through town. And she risks being stoned to death by stepping foot in public, by pushing her way through the crowd, and with every touch, with every brush, making the crowd unclean. She risks it just to get to him. The one she knows embodies the presence of God on this earth and who has the power to make her whole. He doesn't even have to lay hands on her, she says. I just have to touch the hem of his cloak and be healed. My waiting is over. And so she sneaks up on Jesus, touches his cloak, and is healed. And Jesus feels that this power has gone out of him, turns around, and sets his gaze on the crowd and says, who is it that's touched me? She could have, easily, just stood there, blended in with everyone, waited for Jesus to shrug and move on. But I have a feeling that when the Lord of life sets his gaze on a crowd and asks for an answer, her fear, her trembling, perhaps her excitement over the fact that she knows she's been instantly healed, wells up from deep within her. She falls at his feet and she fully confesses everything. We hear no utterance of condemnation. We hear no explanation of, yes, 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 for 12 years God has been bringing down this judgment upon you. All we hear is, daughter, your faith has made you well. Daughter, not outcast. Daughter, not unclean. Daughter, your faith has made you well. You have been restored. You have been brought back in. Daughter, your waiting is over. You've been made new. Go. And then we're thrust back into the storyline of Jairus. When Jesus arrives, we hear that he lays hands upon the daughter, calls her to get up, and tells the disciples to fetch this kid something to eat. And Jairus and his wife and the crowds and the disciples, in all their eager longing and waiting and anxiety over what was going to happen, was over. Friends, if there is any good news in our scriptures this morning, if there's any hope to be found, it's that in the midst of all of our waiting, in the midst of all of our longing, in the midst of all of our fear and our trembling and our anxiety and our frustration in these waiting spaces in life, we do not have to do it alone. We do not have to do it to the point that it leads to despair. These waiting spaces can be filled with hope and can be directed to the God who hears and who answers in time of need. None of us is told that we will avoid waiting. None of us is told that we will avoid suffering. None of us is told that weeping will never happen. But we are told by the witness of our forebears in this faith, we are told time and time and time again that these waiting spaces are met by the living God who comes to see us, to touch us, to heal us, to bring us hope, to bring us peace, to restore our future, to give us an idea, a vision of a horizon to which we can still go. That Jesus steps one foot in front of the other right into our waiting and says, I'm here with you. When Jesus died and was buried and rose again, his disciples were thrust into a waiting time. What now? Is all hope lost? Until Jesus meets them and they see him and they fall down on their knees, and it says they worshiped him, but some still doubted. And Jesus tells them not that they can't ever doubt again, not that they can't ever worry again, not that they can't ever be frustrated again or have fears about the future. But he tells them, all authority in heaven and on earth is mine. And I send you to tell this world about who I am, to make disciples, and to baptize them, and to teach them everything I've told you. And I want you to remember that even in the midst of your waiting and longing and doubting and fearing, what's the last word in the Gospel of Matthew? I'm with you to the end of the age. That means that Jesus is with us even now. In the midst of our waiting for a phone call, for a doctor's appointment, for a diagnosis, for a stupid driver's license, that God is with us in the midst of our waiting, calling us to turn our backs from despair and to turn our gaze and our hearts to Him with hope, with longing, and to have our hopes and our longings met in the face of Jesus. We have no clearer a sign or a call to us to have our hopes met than right here at this table. It's right here where we are called to bring all of it. All of that waiting and longing and hoping for healing, for wholeness, for restoration. All of that frustration and fear and anxiety for peace, for hope, for comfort. It's here where we are met by our risen Lord and given a guarantee of the feast that we stand to share with Him face to face when He comes again in glory. So as we come to this table today, come bearing to mind that prayer that we sang so beautifully this morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. And as you are fed by the faithful hand of our risen Lord, go out into this world to bear the hope and the light and the presence of Jesus to others who are in waiting spaces, to others who need healing and grace and forgiveness, reconciliation and life. Go and tell the world that its waiting is over. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.